Welcome, everybody, to Really San Francisco, the show about what is going on in our dear, sweet, wild, wacky city. Politics, culture, business, you name it. And then here we are. We've got, of course, the co host, my wonderful co host, Richie Greenberg.
Hey everybody.
You'll see him everywhere. And Matt Boschetto. And Matt, you and I have sat in studio before, so it's really great to see you here.
Great. Thank you for having me back, Erica. Thank you for having me, Richie. Excited to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
So today this is the is this the third weekend of January, believe it or not, 2026. And we have there's no shortage of controversy and fun stuff going on here in San Francisco. It's a constant factory, manufacturing all kinds of stuff that sometimes just doesn't get out of certain circles of the city or certain people who, if you know, you know. And but also it's things sometimes make national news. So that's what we love talking about here. And today we are going to be talking a little bit more local, like a hyper local, if you want to call it, a topic that's been in the news for the last couple of years. And Erica, what's today's topic going to be?
Well, it's the Great Highway. It's the great question of the Great Highway. So much has been going on with that. There was a proposition to close it. There was a the supervisor for that district who was ousted because of his actions with that proposition. There was the fury of the public. Then there was pushback from people like Senator Scott Wiener and other activists who want to have this long, beautiful stretch of the city turned into the only park that is in San Francisco. There is no other. There's no beach. There's no Golden Gate Park. There's nothing. So finally, they were able to take over a stretch of highway and transform it into the world's greatest, most important park.
Yeah,
How about that?
once in a generation, I think.
Once in a
Didn't they
generation.
promote it that they said this is we have to pass it
Millions,
once in a generation.
millions of people go out there
Ev
every
ev
day.
every day, millions
In fact, it's the most popular park, I think, in the universe. So
in the
this
world
is
at
where we're
least.
going to
Yeah,
sit.
I know.
Yeah. So a lot of this is, of course, silly hyperbole, and this is what we're talking about today, which is there's so much pushback against it because it just really has not been popular. And so, Matt, why don't you begin then with where you stand on this and who you are, what your background is.
Yeah, thank you. So I live in District 7. I'm in Miraloma Park. Family's been here 5 generations. I ran for in the Miraloma Park, so we really love the West Side. Have you know been going to Ocean Beach since I was a kid with my family. So it's been a big part of our lives. It's always been there, right?
Did you surf? Were you a surfer?
No, I wasn't.
Oh,
My dad was a big surfer,
ah.
and uncle, especially when they were kids and stuff. But no, I never got in. I'm a little squeamish about getting in the water. It's
It's
just
cold. It's really
dark.
cold up
Yeah,
here.
I'm more scared of what can go under your feet more than
Oh,
anything. So um, but yeah, I ran for supervisor in 2024, and so I was kind of front and center on a lot of issues, and that is when they put the proposition on the ballot. And it was just frankly so surprising, I think, to most people. We have the compromise, which a lot of people weren't, so some folks weren't happy about, but for the most part enjoyed a pretty good consensus amongst West Side residents. I would go down there with my family on the weekends, but sort of always acknowledged that it was an important traffic artery during the weekdays. I'd use it when we
so the compromise was what regarding what?
The compromise was it was open Monday through Friday, I think till noon Friday, which some people were upset about it, being closed at noon on Friday instead
So
of.
this is we're talking about for cars, the flow
Yes,
of cars. It's
yes. So it
open
was.
during the week for
That's right.
commuters and right.
Yes, yeah, and it was 20,000 cars a day, I think, average. So it's not insignificant amount, right? And then on the weekends, people can enjoy it as a park, right? So it would close from noon to noon on Friday and Monday morning, and people could enjoy it as a park. It was nice, especially during the COVID times, right? Like when it was fully closed, people loved it. And then so it was the compromise was a good thing. I think everybody kind of had the best of both worlds, right? Were people upset, of course, but again, enjoyed a consensus. So it was just really surprising when it came out, right? And very political. I think when you look at why Joel, the supervisor in Guardio, former supervisor in Guardio, was
Yeah. Yeah.
recalled. I mean, it was very political. I mean, it was put on the ballot at the last minute, right? It
Mhm.
was, loaded from the beginning. Um, it was sort of the tyranny of the masses, right? They kind of used our institutions, or our functions of democracy to sort of push through a really unpopular thing, with the locals, and kind of stick their hands up and say, well, we allowed the public process through letting it be a vote. So it was just kind of rife with I think, like, you know closed door politics, really last minute, lack of accountability, and if we kind of talk about the lawsuit later, actually, sort of an end run around current laws in California,
Mhm.
which I think is actually probably the most troubling part,
Mhm.
and kind of the biggest systemic issue with San Francisco that this sort of reveals.
Now, also deception. So much deception about what the upper grade highway and the lower grade highway and that stretch of pavement and all of it, what it is, what it isn't, what it really is. But even they were promoting it. They were putting out literature. They're sending out flyers and mailers and putting on social media that that particular stretch of the road is obsolete. It's not used anymore. It's falling apart, and they put images that were not even that stretch of the roadway. It was images from elsewhere that yes was under disrepair, but pretending that that was what that was. So, and the messaging, as you said, that we were kind of joking at the top of the show that it's the most popular, well-attended park in the universe. Completely false statements, but the problem is because it's a political statement that the law allows you to say and embellish, and it's up to the other side to now fight back against it. You can't like sue them and say you lied.
Yeah,
Maybe other countries, but not here. But it's
yeah.
outright deception and lies.
No doubt. And I think, like, that was part of the initial opposition, right? It's like there wasn't really any study, certainly not an EIR, right? That's part of the lawsuit that's going on currently. Um,
What's EI? Is it environmental
an
impact?
environmental impact review, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think within that you'd have a lot more studying of, things like the sand abatement and all that. I mean, that's a great example of sort of the misinformation that was just really unfounded. Oh, it would save money. I think there's data this year to show that we're spending a lot more money on sand abatement with the park,
And
Yeah.
and
right?
that's
So
and that's because this dual roadway is right along the not only the water's edge, but it's right up against the sand of the beach. So it's been a problem forever, right? Forever time that natural wind, just pushes sand out onto the pavement and it needs to be taken away.
yeah,
So, Matt, I have a question for you. Were you at that DCCC meeting when people from the local area came out and they literally begged the Democratic Party to back them, to say, please don't close this, please don't vote for Proposition K. And they had person after person of local residents who were workers, uh, parents, you name it. A lot of them were of Asian descent, um, and some of them were in tears, and
yeah,
they took the mic and they each made statements and begged for support to keep it open. And for me, that was a real pivotal moment to watch each person come up, make cogent arguments, passionate, true. And then it seemed like I watched the people up on the stage essentially turn away.
Hmm.
And it was really shocking and disturbing. And every once in a while you do have a political epiphany. And for me, that was a holy cow,
Yeah.
who are you representing here?
Yeah.
Did you happen to be there, or are you familiar
I
with?
think I was. I mean, that was the no on K when they
Yeah,
did no on K endorsement. I mean, the room was packed, right? I
oh,
think they had to limit the comments to like a minute when it's
right.
usually two. Yeah, that was really interesting. And I mean, to be fair, I think being on the inside and really understanding the fight, I walked in that room knowing we were going to lose because the DCCC, even though they kind of claim to be a moderate board, they are very extreme on some issues. When you look at this current board, when you look at housing, when you look at transit issues, I mean, they're essentially, a board of urbanists, right? Who have um, a very sort of pro, I guess, I want to say like pro park, anti car, pro
Hmm.
public transit, which who's against transit, right? It's kind of crazy, right? But that was it's a that board was already skewed. A lot of the special interests that drove Prop K to begin with really drives a lot of the board, the slate that got on that board, right? So I really question whether they're true moderates in a lot of ways. I question their seriousness on, so not some of them
No,
obviously
no, there are
their hand
some.
tongue is great on public
Yeah,
safety, but I
yeah.
question some of their seriousness about these other issues that are really important to us, right?
But
Same.
and there are some out there that just say there's no such thing as a moderate Democrat, and so that's. But just to reiterate, also we're talking about the DCCC. That's the Democratic County Central Committee. That's basically the leadership of the Democratic Party for the city of San Francisco.
So what I want my question is, so there's a big overall question is, what's the ultimate motivation? I sometimes I have to step back and think, well, what is it that you really
Yeah,
want? Why close that highway? Why push for
yeah.
something that the people clearly don't want, and that actually ended up with a supervisor getting the boot? Why?
I,
Yeah.
What's
I
your
I think it was a test. I think it was looking at a template to see if they could repeat this elsewhere around the city. That
Well,
that's
I think,
that's my
yeah, and
yeah.
I agree with that, Richie. I think that again, when you look at the tech, like the arguments of the lawsuit, kind of what we saw and what we believed, San Francisco is so fearful about what Washington's doing and what they're trying to do and squeeze by and circumnavigate the laws. But it's clear that it happened here,
Hmm.
right? I mean, our supervisors are doing it, right? Which is something that's really scary, right? When they can have an end run around, um, state law and regulations in a proper way, procedural way to do things, right? And I think these real evangelists around this, it's a really kind of religious zealot like movement, right? Yeah, and
Cultish.
so
Yeah.
Mwah!
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not a
exactly.
they
Yeah.
have a break a few eggs to make an omelet sort of mentality, right? They don't. I think they'd be happy to use a loophole if that loophole existed, right? And where somebody who cares about good governance wholly would see a loophole, and no matter if they can use it to their benefit, would want it closed, right? And so I think to your point, Erica, like the question, where does it come from? It's really like the top umbrella, I would say, was climate ideology, right? And through there, it's kind of this ideology of urbanism that being in denser places, not being in cars, taking public transit is actually what's going to drive a better situation with the climate, right? And that stems out to kind of hardcore YIMBYism and kind of anti-car transit, pro-transit views, right? Which is again, like I think you can argue that San Francisco needs more housing, needs reform on its housing process, needs to get out of the way. you know um, Public transit's a civic good, right? The second
Hmm.
densest city in the United States should have a very, very good public transit.
Hmm.
As should be the standard for the rest of the public transit systems, which it obviously is not, since we
Yeah.
need to do another parcel tax to fund it. But they do it in a way that's, I guess, just so religiously idealistic that they end up, again, like it's more of a stick mentality than a carrot. So they're happy to close a road, right? They're happy to kind of do things that force people out of their cars rather than incentivizing them to get out of their cars.
Hmm.
um, and it's
I
really
think that's so important. And by the way, I think that this podcast, really San Francisco is clearly local, but it really does. I think
Hmm.
it's sort of a word of warning to everybody in the United States. Pay close attention to the people who are governing your local area, because if you don't, they can they will take advantage of
Yeah,
every situation, if they, which sounds really terrible. I'm not being anti-government, it's not that.
yeah,
It's just pay attention.
yeah,
It's shocking what can happen when you
yeah.
don't.
Well, we're seeking an appeal for the lawsuit. It was shot down.
So can we actually back up for just a minute?
Go ahead.
For people who weren't paying absolute close attention to this whole the saga from the beginning, you have a road. There was a ballot measure put on to the voters of the entire city to close that specific stretch of a road. A lot of pushback, but the pushback did not succeed. So what wound up happening is that road, the Upper Great Highway, in a section of the city on the west side, was permanently closed to private cars. That was called
Ostensibly
Prop
to
K.
make it into a park.
They
And
claim a park, but
right,
they're required to keep the asphalt, required to keep the pavement.
right.
So that passed the whole uproar, but then a lawsuit came out, and that's where you can talk a little bit about that, Matt. A lawsuit was filed to undo that ballot measure. And so, can you let viewers and listeners know what were the basics? Why was it being looked to be on what grounds?
Yeah, well,
Do it.
when we took a closer look at it, and sadly this kind of came, we were so focused on winning the campaign, we weren't so focused on sort of how it got on the ballot in the first place, right? And we took a closer look to that, kind of as we, pulled our heads up after the campaigns, um, it just it just became clear that we had there's really good reasons to suggest it wasn't legally on the ballot, right? It wasn't legally compliant, and therefore not a legal ballot measure. It shouldn't have been on the ballot. And the first, I'd say kind of the first reasons, and where we're still kind of leaning and believe we have a good argument around, is that the state has plenary authority over the closure of roads, and it doesn't leave it up to citizens initiatives or ballot measures where citizens can choose to close them or not. And that's because, if you sort of think, imagine if we shut down, Marina Boulevard, right? Imagine if, you know,
Hayes,
right,
Hayes,
like
yeah.
Santa Monica,
Embarcadero.
LA
Yeah,
decided to close Santa
yeah,
Monica Boulevard, right? And,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
roads, it's like roads are really important for the flow of different municipalities, not just the municipality they're in, right? The flow of goods and is really important for commerce. People and goods is really important for commerce. So, it is, you can see from the state's interest that they don't want people to just arbitrarily close things that are kind of, very important for the functioning of the state, right? And the communities within the state. So that's sort of the first reason. um, the second reason is that there should have been an EIR
Yeah,
after
the
the
environmental impact report.
yeah,
Yeah.
as I said before, which is part of California CEQA law. um, and that's kind of where it gets really interesting. I mean, the judge shot down both arguments. We, but what's interesting about the EIR, we do think we have good arguments. That's why we're appealing them and taking it to another.
Oh, so that's the status now. We're appealing
Yes,
that.
yes,
Okay.
we are seeking an appeal. We have some very good counsel that will, I publicly speak about later down
Hmm.
the road, but we're working on it, putting that all in place right now. Um, and but the interesting thing about the EIR argument was that the judge said that for supervisors, putting an initiative on the ballot does not constitute an official action by the Board of Supervisors. Um,
Hmm.
That's
yeah,
odd.
That doesn't sound right.
yeah, which is interesting because
That's
like
the way it's all done that way.
And
If it's
who are
to
the
yeah,
supervisors? Myrna
was
Melgar.
Myrna Melgar, Joel Engardio, Dean Preston,
Raphael Mandelman.
Raphael Mandelman, and I want to say Matt Dorsey
Hmm.
were the ones who put it on.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And so what, like, if we had one more person on this podcast, we couldn't decide to go put a ballot measure on, right? So it's
Right.
like those four people have a special capacity. That capacity is written under the San Francisco Charter. So to
Hmm.
say that, them proposing the closure of the Great Highway does not constitute a project under state law is kind of shocking,
That,
right?
yeah.
And subsequently doesn't need EIR. So
Hmm.
what's kind of been, I think, exposed is that there is a runaround CEQA through this avenue. If this is the precedent, that
And CEQA is California
California
Environmental
Environmental Quality Act.
Quality Act.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are you have fierce defenders of CEQA, you have fierce enemies of CEQA, but it's like I'm not. I got to be honest. I'm not like a huge defender. I'm not a huge, definitely not a huge opponent of it. But it's like the law is the law, right? And it's
Hmm.
again like it concerns me that there is this end run around it, and it's not good. We need to close those, and I frankly I don't trust the San Francisco Board of
Yeah, at
Supervisors
this point. Now,
not to abuse it, right?
a quick question. Does this, I get the feeling that the judge that ruled in this case, that he thinks that the state and its motor vehicle codes and all laws like that, they don't have jurisdiction over city or county roads, basically, and that you could put a ballot measure to close if you wanted, and the state doesn't have the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that was sort of his argument. Yeah, that was his argument that, because it was a full closure, right? And then, he did cite a lot of other of the data, right? Of the data, which, unfortunately, I don't think is skewed. It's their city, the same studies that, by the MTA, by different groups in the cities that the proponents were citing, right? And so, the arguments that it's, not a valid road anymore, it's not going to affect traffic, right? Those all kind of really informed, I think, the judge's decision on that, right? And then the other fact that one of our other arguments was that if you close a road, you have to close it fully, but it still has access to cars, namely city cars, right? It always will be a road, right? And you've
Yeah.
only closed it to
Hmm.
private vehicles,
Right. Maintenance and emergency
right?
vehicles. Yeah.
Yeah, and his argument, which I think is good, right? And then the city's argument was that look, any park needs city vehicles to go on it, right? So like we never fully closed, like a road that would be used as a park will never be fully closed, right?
Like in Golden Gate Park,
Yeah,
JFK
exactly.
Drive. Yeah.
And so I mean it is like it's a very deep and nuanced legal argument that I think I do think it's the state has a lot more interest in ruling in our direction than a city judge would in the city's direction, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. I think I at first was upset with how things went, but the more I looked at it, I do think the judge, did a fair job, right? He was truly engaging with us authentically. Um, but it's just a hard case to win in a sit, right? When a judge is kind of looking at it from a city perspective, right? It's much more of a, I think, looking at the total interest of the state. And so that's why we feel like we're going to have a better shot when we bring it up to that level. And I do think the EIR, it's very clear, like when you look at that argument of what defines a public agency, I think we're clearly on the right side of that. And it's something that kind of morally needs to be addressed. It's not just about the Great Highway anymore. And I mean, it never was for me, but it's clear now it's not just about the Great Highway.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is such a multifaceted discussion or topic because you're looking at a lot of different ideology, uh, philosophies going on, right? So
Mhm.
you're talking about, you mentioned the getting rid of cars or reducing personal driving and having kind of a more transit friendly city. We already have a transit friendly city, by the way. We have pretty good transit. It can always be improved, but
Yeah.
there really is this movement toward um, reducing private vehicles, right?
Yeah.
So that's one huge motivation, is like kind of chipping away at the uh, making it easy for people to actually drive. So that's one. The other issue, of course, is development. There's been a lot of people have eyed the area around around the Great Highway, the Upper Great Highway, as potentially we're going to build up, we're going to densify it, we're going to get rid of all these pesky single family homes with yards, and that type of thing, because it is almost morally offensive to people who don't ascribe to that. They want
Yeah.
big, fat, dense, whether it's Miami style housing or Singapore or whatever you want to call. That's what they're looking for.
Hong Kong, yeah.
Yeah, sure, right. So you have that, and then you have equity. You have a lot of different issues that sort of came together all at once to create this disaster of public opinion, because now you have a lot of angry people, right?
Yeah.
On both sides.
On both sides, but
Mhm.
primarily from residents, right, who just say, wait, how did this all happen? Well, that's how it happened, because it's different, sort of a merging of different philosophies,
Yeah.
And
right.
again,
I mean,
people on the east side, voters on the east side of the city, were the ones that were more into let's just make another park. Another park, that's great. We're going to vote yes and make another park. And everyone that was actually in the area, us included, me included, and our neighborhoods on the west side, were like, no, it's not really creating a park. And we use that road. So it
So
became an east versus west ideology fight.
it's which is
yeah.
really funny, because I have a dear friend who lives in North Beach, and she was a huge advocate for closing the Great Upper Great Highway. She kept saying, I love parks. Parks are great. I'm like, okay, fabulous. She lives in North Beach, and there was a proposition to close off Grant and I think parts of Columbus, but also around the church in
Washington
Washington
Square?
Square, right?
Yeah.
And she was vehemently opposed to it.
Yeah.
So it's just like, and I
Uh,
understand, like, we are we naturally hypocritical? Is this something that we just sort of have to think,
Well,
we
but that's
know
NIMBY. That's a NIMBY, not in my. You can't close this
Yeah.
in my backyard. There, you NIMBY, in a
it, it,
sense. In a sense, right?
it's just sort of an interesting way of looking at it, which is how introspective are we really about our own ideas? So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, Matt?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, with the housing stuff, I remember when we were doing No on K, we kind of it was such a strong um like opinion of a lot of the people who were supporting the opposition to the closure. And I had a lot of understanding for it. I had the same fear, but I really kind of suppressed the message as we were going, because you're just going to get labeled like a conspiracy theorist, right?
Hmm.
But now that we have the Safeway, like it's clear that that's what's happening. Look at the Safeway in the marina, right? We
Mhm.
have, on West Portal, the 65, just right here on West Portal, we have like 80-foot, 65 unit building, 9 stories. So it's probably higher than 80 feet actually. Um, I mean, and they're both using state programs. They're not using the local program, right? So it's kind of, when you look at sort of all this legislation that's being pushed on the west side, which happens to be in north side, which happens to be the single family zone single family areas between, where you need a car. It's like there's less transit connectivity. You're going to need your car. I mean, you look at it, it's like the Great Highway, the upzoning, the parcel tax to save muni.
Mhm.
I mean, single family homeowners on the west side are essentially like under siege,
They
right?
are.
Yes, and
By
of
the San
course we are.
Francisco
Yes,
legislators and
that's
the
right.
state legislators. And it's pretty like it's pretty crazy to see, this, and a lot of it's to your point for the sake of equity, which is like, maybe like, a little thought provoking for somebody like me, right? Whose family is, white and west side from the west side, right? But I know a litany of Chinese American families that immigrated, started in Chinatown in an SRO, right? And within a generation or 2 generations had moved out and built a home, owned a home and built a life in San Francisco on the west side. And
Hmm.
so, like, to kind of say that, that doesn't, it's just kind of all people who've, benefited from, historical inequities, and therefore we're going to just really kind of put the thumb down it's just not accurate, right?
It's
So,
not.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
completely
It
inaccurate.
really isn't. And also, a lot of these tall buildings that people do are really pushing for, they're not very appealing
No.
to everybody, right? You
Mhm.
even have like south of Market. In fact, I think the building that Supervisor Matt Dorsey lives in, is, I believe, 30 to 50% empty. It's a beautiful
Mm.
building. It really is. It's a gorgeous complex with lots of amenities, and but it's just
Mm.
it's not always attractive to the people that they say that it's going to be attractive to. Families don't necessarily want to move into an apartment building.
Yeah.
Especially if there's no parking, if there's no
Yeah,
garage or
sure.
parking too. But so
You
so
need a
can,
mix. You need a
yeah,
mix.
you
That's
do, you do. Yeah.
yeah.
Along Van Ness, which is
Yep.
obviously a very long street. There's so much opportunity to build up, build tall. You can definitely do it there. You're not going to get much pushback because it already kind of has that same
Hmm.
feel, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it can work. You can increase our density by focusing on the areas where
It
it
makes
makes sense.
sense.
You know,
Yeah.
there's the new building where the old McDonald's was on Stanion and Haight.
Yes.
You know, and that has zero parking. I think it's like 150 units, zero parking.
Hmm. Yep.
So it's kind of, upsetting with that, right? Because it's such a hard neighborhood to park in,
Right.
right?
To begin with,
But
it's
to
popular.
begin
It's
with,
it's
yeah,
right
and you're
next to
gonna
Golden
add,
Gate Park, Panhandle, all of that, that
yeah,
whole
and you're gonna
area.
add
Yeah.
at least another 200 people to that, right?
Hmm.
But if you actually look at the building, it's
I saw it yesterday.
it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, and
Yep.
it looks
Yep.
like kind of it looks San Franciscan.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think there's a way that it can be done right. When you look at um the one on West Portal, it just looks like a plastic box, right? It
I
just looks
Yeah.
know.
I
horrible,
haven't looked at
right?
that. I'll visit that soon.
Yeah, you got to look
And
at
the
it.
one
Yeah.
and
But
it has to fit with the neighborhood, which cracks me up because you did talk about the Marina Safeway and about the
Yeah,
proposed development for that. And very few people really came out. There were some people from out of state, some
it's
actually from out of the
beautiful.
country,
Yeah.
like, we
yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
The
I just
community was like,
I
ah.
love looking
But
at the graphic and just like that kind of cutout in the middle. It looks like it's
Mm.
like the developer was showing it to city planners, and they were like, "Oh, we need a view there," and let's knock down a big
Well,
wall.
that's
And
very
there's their
Miami.
view.
That's Miami-ish. They do that. They put a tree right in the middle. They put a tree, a potted tree right in the middle of the cutout area.
okay, so
So,
let's wrap this up in a
yeah.
great, big, beautiful bow. Matt, what do you think the future for all of this is? Are you positive, negative? What do you plan on doing? Just kind of just give us a good roadmap to this crazy road issue.
Yeah, we're gonna push the lawsuit forward. Again, we're confirming to engage with some very, very good counsel for appeals. The appeals level. I feel very confident that at that level, our arguments will be heard um, and agreed with. You also have the ballot, the citizens signature initiative to put it back on the ballot. Um, I am supportive of it. I do think it's going to be a lot more of an uphill battle than the lawsuit, right?
A ballot measure.
The ballot measure,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
Especially since we just had within the last week the new appointed District 4 Supervisor Alan Wong. And this is to take over for Joel Engardio and what was her name, Bea Alcaraz in the middle for one
yeah,
week, right? So that's another whole issue. But
yeah,
so he could have the local district supervisor could have, if he had support from his colleagues on the board of supervisors, they then could have went ahead and put the ballot measure on for us to vote and have a stab at it again. But that failed, so now it has to become a citizen-led signature gathering to qualify to have it on the ballot.
yeah,
That's right.
exactly. And I think this is where kind of it's sad. I mean, the other thing that I want to support the lawsuit, even though I support the ballot measure, I'm focused on the lawsuit. It's just that I feel like in the legislative kind of in that realm, it's gotten very political, right? The Great Highway, the opposition to the park was a bipartisan issue, right? To the closure was a bipartisan issue. You had everybody on the political spectrum in agreement that we don't want this done. And I think what's unfortunately happened, and I don't blame the current Supervisor Wong. I think he's trying to do his best. I spoke to him, multiple times, like kind of in all that, and I really appreciate kind of him standing up for the district and agreeing with the issue. But I think unfortunately there's a lot of politics going on around that, right? So
Sure.
you have to kind of question, I think sometimes, like, why people are doing things and stuff. And again, it's we're fighting this battle that we already lost, where we're having to raise money from everyday people, and you have special tech, like special interest billionaires, right? Jeremy Stoppelman, you got like the founder of
Hmm.
Yelp, right? Like
Hmm.
crypto billionaires, you got all these people piling in a ton of money
Do.
behind them, right?
Well,
And
but just if I
it's
could
going to
jump
be a
in,
hard fight.
but then they're facing the potential, the billionaires tax, so they might have already have left California in general, and there's the also extension of the overpaid CEO tax that's local here in the city too, that is being resurrected and prolonged.
Yeah.
So they're getting their reasons to maybe not be involved and leave.
So
So
much
as
so much has changed in a year, right? I mean, it's
Oh,
like we
oh
have
yeah.
we have another gross receipts tax, another parcel tax. It's like San
Mhm.
Francisco just continues to be San Francisco, it seems like.
Yeah.
So
and that's a great way to end this. Matt, thank you so much. You certainly gave a lot of great background, and
you.
yeah, we really appreciate it for sure. And I'm sure our viewers and listeners do too. Words of warning to everybody out there: just pay attention, get involved. Um, you're the people who are involved in running your city work for you. They just
Hmm.
do, right? So that means you have to be out and active. Thank you so much, Richie.
Thanks everybody for listening. It's another fun episode of Really San Francisco, and we look forward to next time, and we'll see you soon. Thank
Bye, everybody.
you. Thanks. Bye, everybody.